Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the movie discussion Pocket Dimension, dimension where time does not exist, and the only thing that matters is film. I'm Jay. I'm not Jay. That's Jay. I'm Cole. I sometimes get us confused. We're so alike. But that's Jay. And we come here after a week off that we sort of were forced to take because of, like, it's kind of, somewhat the madness of the holiday season and stuff. As you see, I have different surroundings. I shuffled from my apartment to my parents' home here in Sydney, and all the running around and stuff that people do for Christmas. And so we just kind of decided we should give ourselves a little room to breathe and prepare instead of squeak out an episode last minute style and stuff. But hopefully that should be the only blip. We'll see. We're hoping to do a show around next week. I'm not exactly sure what day is Christmas. I mean, if it's Christmas or Christmas Eve, no.
Monday, I believe, is Christmas.
So yeah, that wouldn't be too bad.
I'd be down for it if you wanted to.
No, but Boxing Day is like my favorite. That's like my favorite day of the year. Is the day after Christmas, Boxing Day here.
Boxing Day, right?
I love Boxing Day. It's just the day where you relax and you get to try out your presents and stuff. So I mean, I would certainly have the time and stuff. So yeah, we'll let you know. But as far as we know, that it probably is looking good for the 26th to do an episode, and we're hoping to do something kind of special for that, if we can get it prepared in time, because it's a little more ambitious than our usual episodes. So anyway, we'll keep you posted on that. So down to tonight's episode, we had to go sort of way back into the vault of movies that Jay and I have thrown out to each other when we made the show about listing possibilities and stuff like that. I don't think Jay had ever seen this film. I just sort of thought of it as an afterthought because, well, one, I just really want an excuse to watch it again. And the other we'll get into because I think there's all sorts of interesting things surrounding it that makes it worth talking about. But the other thing is also just that I kind of have this sort of a personal, not personal connection to the movie, but it's weird because of it's a movie. I don't think for somebody in their mid-30s, I don't think too many people in my age range saw this movie as a young kid, but I did. I saw this movie before I saw any Star Wars film, and there's a few reasons why. So back in the early 90s, when my family had, when cable was simpler and we had a cable package with some of the pay channels and stuff like that, and we had the Disney Channel, which in Canada was always called Family Channel, which is just an ordinary channel now. We've talked a little bit how different it was back then, especially compared to today. Family Channel was a good channel. It was great because not only did you get like all those great shorts, like all those shorts with like, Mickey, Mickey, Donald, Goofy. I've seen every single one of those in one way or another and stuff like that. And it had some just sort of kidsy shows, but nothing like today. Today's like Disney Channel is just a bunch of like bullshit sitcoms with, little fabricated stars and stuff like that. The closest thing that was to that was on Family Channel back when I watched it was the second iteration of the Mickey Mouse Club, the 90s version, which I did watch quite a bit. But even that paid a lot of homage to Disney's history. And that was the good thing about Family Channel, at least back then, was that it was very much about Disney and its history. And it showed old stuff all the time, to the point where I was confused because I didn't know how old some of the stuff I was watching or how current some of it was. I didn't know, right? Like, they would just air specials, and I'd have to figure out sort of for myself. Like, there's a special that's called, I think, just called like Disneyland USA, which is just basically kind of like a documentary style thing where they take the camera through the park and show you its attractions. It's like, I don't know, it's like in the late 50s. It's only a few years after the park had first opened, and I can't remember most of it, but there's an interesting part, though, where it comes across like these 5 brothers of different ages that are all singing, and then you find out, if you remember the names, and the youngest one being Donnie, oh, it's the Osmonds. It's actually the Osmonds, before they had achieved any real fame, and they're there in the park, like, singing a cappella and stuff. It's pretty funny. So that's just sort of one example of some of the weird, older stuff they would show. Now, to tie it into this movie, what happened was, apparently back in 1979, when this movie was going to come out, I'll say it right now. Okay, so this is The Black Hole from 1979, and probably the most interesting thing about it is that it is a Disney movie, because nothing about it seems Disney, and we're going to get into that. It was Disney's first ever PG film. It's much, much darker than anything Disney had ever attempted before, or maybe even since, really. This is a precursor to the Touchstone label, or whatever you want to call it, that they developed a few years later. I think the first one was Splash in 1984. The whole idea being, of course, for slightly more adult stuff for Disney to release. They would release your Touchstone. This is a few years before that, so this is still just an absolute Disney release. Maybe this is something that gave them the idea for it. So anyway, It was also the most expensive Disney movie ever produced at the time. It had a budget over $20 million, and also you can find out they put over $5 or $6 million more into just the advertising, and that takes us back to how how I remember this movie. It's because I guess part of that went to back in 1979, I guess airing on TV at some point. There was a special called, I believe it was called Major Effects, and it was really weird, and it was all about basically a celebration of special effects in Disney films through the years, and but also the whole point of it was to promote this new movie, this new exciting movie that was going to use the best special effects ever to come out so far, The Black Hole. And it was really weird, and it's hosted by a guy that looks like a superhero. He basically looks like a Superman ripoff. He's just a guy in tights and a cape, and he calls himself Major Effects, and he's sort of your narrator, tour guide through it all. And he introduces segments and stuff. He even sings songs. There's a part where like he sings the song Paper Moon, but with different lyrics to make it sound like he's describing how special effects work. Like there's a part where he says something like, "It's only a plaster cliff hanging over a cardboard sea," you know, and stuff like that. It's a really weird special, but I used to have it on tape too. But I remember I watched it back in the day. But the whole point of it was it would show you little snippets, little teasers of this big upcoming movie, The Black Hole. And I didn't know at the time. It seemed old, but I didn't know how old it was. I knew it couldn't have been a movie that was coming out now because I'd heard nothing about it. But anyway, and then eventually they would just air the movie itself on Family Channel, which is how I wound up seeing it back then. In an even weirder twist, I have no idea how I wound up with it, but they did make a good amount of merchandise for the movie too, and I owned something. I owned a book. People might be familiar with a line of children's books called, I believe, Little Golden Books, if anybody remembers that. And they had sort of like a gold, shiny...
Yeah, I love those.
Right? So I owned quite a few of those. Well, there was a Little Golden Book of this, which is basically a picture book just detailing a little sort of side story about the two robot characters, Vincent and Bob, as they make their way exploring the ship Cygnus and avoiding the sinister robot Maximilian. That's somewhere in this house. It used to be in this room. It's not anymore. But I owned that too, and I used to read it quite a bit because it had such a foreboding atmosphere. I kind of really enjoyed it and stuff. So unlike most people, I do have memories of this movie as a kid and watched it multiple times. And it wasn't, of course, until years later that I realized sort of what an oddity it was. And of course, and realized also that it's a type of it's a movie that most people don't know or remember or are surprised to find out exists, or if they remember it existed, they didn't know it was Disney. So there's quite a lot of things I think that just made it interesting right off the hop. And of course, I love talking about historical context. So Disney was always, you know, look at the world we live in right now. Disney's buying Fox, I guess. Disney's just buying everything. The Star Wars movies are Disney. So this is long before Disney owned Star Wars and kind of wanted to do their own thing. But it's also, you have to keep in mind that Disney had been in a sharp decline in the 70s. As great as they had been throughout, Walt Disney himself died in 1966. By 1971, Roy Disney was dead too. And leadership fell to Walt's son-in-law. I believe his name is Ron Miller. And his legacy has been very widely criticized for how Disney operated under his tenure, I can't say the word properly, throughout the 70s. And yeah, you could just sort of see a decline in overall quality, and they weren't ruling like they used to anymore. And this was also, the 70s was the rise of sort of the blockbuster film that was more all ages too. So suddenly Disney, for the first time, had real competition when it came to, you know, family-friendly stuff. There was other stuff going on out there challenging them. By 1979, the year that this came out, one of their most talented animators, Don Bluth, had become so disillusioned with the company that he left and struck out on his own. That's another story. We all know about that. And as we know, things didn't even get better for Disney in the next few years. The early 80s was still not so great for Disney. It wasn't really to the second half of the 80s that, I think it really started with the release of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and then we get going. The DuckTales cartoon, and of course, then the first really great blockbuster full feature animated film they'd done in a long time, The Little Mermaid in '89, leading to what was the Disney Renaissance. So this is really very much the dark years of Disney, if you want to call it that, I guess. I mean, they're still a force, they're still a name, people knew him, and maybe that's why they wanted to try something so different, because The Black Hole is, different. It's weird because it's one of those movies that's kind of schizophrenic, and you don't really even know what they're trying to do with it, because it seems a lot like a lot of the sci-fi movies of the 70s before Star Wars. It's funny how like Star Wars changed everything. Like sci-fi movies from the 70s all kind of had the same, I think we talked about before, sort of same bleak, depressing vibe. Even some of the good ones like Logan's Run, or I know one that Jay and I want to do on the show eventually, which we think is really good but still has a depressing vibe, is Silent Running. You know, stuff like that. They're all sort of low-key.
I mean, I think Star Wars is much more action-oriented.
Right.
Whereas this is, all it's very similar to Star Wars, which is what I mean. Star Trek is what I got from the beginning. Yeah, I mean, obviously they were trying to make another Star Wars, right?
Right. So, well, I mean, it seems like they were trying to make something, then they kind of realized that they had to put Star Wars elements in it, and that's where we get like sort of like goofy robot sidekicks coming in and some of the laser battles. But whereas Star Wars, I mean, sure, it's great sci-fi, but for someone like me and a lot of people, I'll always think of Star Wars as fantasy first. This movie's more hard sci-fi; it's not fantasy, really, which is the main difference between them. But yeah, there's some real tone issues that I think were definitely influenced by Star Wars. You know, trying to come up and compete with it. This is before Empire Strikes Back comes out, so at the time, Star Wars is a big phenomenon, but still just one movie. And I think, yeah, they're trying to get Disney thinking, oh, we should get in on this. And yet, it's not like that. It doesn't seem like they picked the right script for it, because it's such a bleak, serious movie, and it's mostly just sort of a heavy-handed movie full of talking. And whereas Star Wars, again, in fantasy and it's fun, you're zipping around, you're going to different planets, you're seeing aliens and stuff. This movie, 99% of it all takes place on the same big, sort of empty, derelict, gloomy ship. You know, which I think is cool, but it creates a very different sort of atmosphere and a very different sort of movie. It's not high adventure at all. It's not Star Wars.
When you're expecting to see a Star Wars type movie, you're going to be very disappointed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let people right off the hop. It's more of an experiment. It's in sort of a hard sci-fi type thing. These are people in the future that have a connection to Earth. They talk about it. I think it's supposed to be in the 22nd century somewhere. And it's funny, like there's the very opening with their starship. It's such a junky looking starship. You're like, oh, really? That's what they're flying in? Like, it doesn't look cool at all. I guess, again, I think they were really trying to go for realism in a way, trying to make it seem like more realistic. But I do actually like the ship they wind up on, the Cygnus.
Right, yeah. That's what I was going to say, too.
Very cool, interesting. And as I said, between watching the movie and reading the book, the Cygnus gave me a sort of really weird imprint in my brain on what I think of sort of vast places and stuff like that, like long hallways, places that don't have any sort of decoration, places that are very sterile. It's like there's been times in my life where I've stepped into places like that, and it makes me think of the Cygnus, like the idea of like something drifting out in space, but it's so quiet, and there's like no life, and you could get lost in it. I don't know. And that sort of 70s aesthetic that is still hanging on to things in the style of like the chairs and the screens and stuff like that. It made a very big impression on me, in that I think about it all the time without consciously thinking about the movie. And I think that just has to do with being so young when I saw it and stuff. So it was just an odd movie in so many ways, and a weird cast. And that was another thing that had happened throughout the 70s, was that Disney had sort of gotten this reputation among actors being something to avoid, because it was usually meant if you're on your way up as a nobody, or if you're coming down as you used to be somebody and now you're just sort of a faded name. Like, it's not the place to be if you want to thrive, and you know. So,
well, I mean, we've got a pretty star-studded cast here, though.
To a certain extent. I mean, how big of a star is Ernest Borgnine? Ernest Borgnine.
I'll get to that in a minute, but yeah.
In the 70s, but none of it is significant except for side adventure, really.
Well, you got Robert Forster.
Yeah, sure.
Anthony Perkins. Maximilian Schell.
Perkins is a completely faded star at this point, right? To me.
Sure.
Perkins
I understand that, yeah. And Yvette Mimieux. I don't know if you're familiar with The Time Machine.
Yeah.
She's Weena in that film. So
Oh no, I didn't know that at all. I knew her name from somewhere. I thought she was good casting because
Yeah,
even she's the only female in the movie, and they didn't like succumb to the idea of like having like some sort of like I don't know sexy bimbo running around there. Like she's supposed to be a doctor of some kind, and it's at least believable. You
yeah.
know, you don't have to just shake your head and go, "Yeah, she's a doctor." Like she doesn't look like some dumb like fashion model. She's not that young and or super pretty or anything. I mean, she's fine, but I mean, I kind of applaud her casting.
Mm-hmm.
Yvette Mimieux.
Yeah, I'd like to do the Time Machine on here at some point too. I like that
The
film quite a bit.
19, was it 1960?
60, yeah.
Yeah, it's a long time ago. Yeah, it's an interesting movie. I like it too. And then you've got a couple voices that are uncredited, those being Roddy McDowall and one of the most typecast actors of all time, and definitely his most different role, Slim Pickens, who Disney just kind of owned at the time. They could just make Slim Pickens do whatever they wanted, I assume. So they were like, "You're going to be a robot," and he's like, "Okay." He's kind of, I assume, how the conversation went.
Yeah, I just don't understand why they were both unaccredited though. It seems kind of odd.
It does, because I mean, they both had, especially Roddy McDowall. You'd think that would be.
He
Unless he requested them not to, I don't know. You never know. Sometimes with these uncredited things, you've had like I used to think like it wasn't their idea, but sometimes I've read sometimes like it was the actor's idea. They didn't want him credited.
sure.
I don't know the story here.
I mean, they probably didn't know it was going to be a huge flop when they made it.
Well, that's the other thing. See, that's I think when you talk to people who actually do know this movie, what they know and what they remember is that it was a big flop, but it's not nearly the flop that people say it is or was. It made $36 million. So it was a flop in that it certainly didn't perform to their expectations, but it's not like they lost a ton of money on it or anything like that. And it didn't really do anything to damage Disney any further. As I said, they would continue to produce somewhat underwhelming projects for the next 5 or 6 years anyway. So it's not really the big flop or disaster that people kind of think of it as.
Maybe critically a flop, I guess.
For sure, that yeah, I don't think anybody liked it.
Um, but yeah, I was doing some reading, and they actually were trying to get the cameras that were made by Industrial Light and Magic that they used on Star Wars,
Right.
and they wanted so much money to rent them that it was not feasible. So they basically developed their own system.
Yeah.
It turned out to be better than what the Star Wars movies or Star Wars the original was filmed with.
Yeah. See, that's true, but what gets lost is even though that is better, the designs and stuff for Star Wars is better anyway. So Star Wars still looks better because it's working from a better design, I think. Like this movie doesn't have like really great designs. I don't think so many great sci-fi movies. I'd be so pleased if I could get a hold of some of the original sketches and stuff like that. This is not really one of those movies. It's all kind of blah.
I think all the interiors are terrible. The costumes are terrible.
Mm-hmm.
But all of the matte painting stuff and the exteriors of the ship and the black hole even look really
good.
I think.
It's good. Yeah, so I mean, it still had its moments with some of the stuff that would be influential. I mean, it's worth noting that, like, in their time, which was actually the same year, Tron, which was Disney, and Blade Runner were both flops, and they would go on to be very, like, this is not nearly to that extent, but it still did make its mark to a certain extent, I would say. But, yeah, it's definitely not one of Disney's finer moments, but I think it's one of the more interesting moments, because it was sort of a daring movie to make. Again, this is before Touchstone Earth existed. It's the first time they ever had a PG rating. At the 13-minute mark, somebody says, damn. They followed up with hell a few seconds later. You have a somewhat violent death in the movie. And then you have existential themes that seem to have a lot to do with like life and death and heaven and hell and God and stuff. I mean, it's not as much as it sounds, but it's there. So it's all very different territory for Disney, even today.
Yeah. A robot dies.
Yeah, which is probably the most dramatic death in the film, I would say. I mean, there's only like 4 real deaths, and it's probably the most dramatic, or at least the one you care the most about, I guess.
Yeah. And that's Bob, Slim Pickens.
Yeah. Slim Pickens.
Which is just fucking ridiculous. I didn't know it was Slim Pickens when I watched it, and I was like, "Yep, that was Slim Pickens, all right." It was ridiculous casting of a voice on that.
Yeah, I know. They even try to like explain their he was manufactured in Houston. You know.
No. I mean the Roddy McDowell I get because they're like, we need someone that sounds like C-3PO.
Yeah, like a smarty pants type guy.
A British C-3PO type guy.
It's interesting though because I do like the character Vincent. So we have one of our floating robots, Vincent. What is it? It's like very important information centralized or something like that. But like, where is C-3PO's thing with statistics? You'd always throw out statistics for you. This guy would just throw out like well-known like proverbs and sayings and philosophical things. Like everything he said was basically that, to a point that it gets really old really fast.
Yeah, he's like basically a fortune cookie.
Yeah, he's constantly just throwing out these little nuggets of wisdom and stuff that regurgitated and stuff. And I mean, they all more or less fit, but it's just so much that, yeah, you just kind of like, okay, give it a rest now. I mean, they even the characters comment on it and stuff, but it doesn't work out to be quite as funny, I think, as it was intended to be. I still do like the character Vincent. He's arguably the most proactive character in the movie and the most successful in what he manages to get done, whereas most of the humans are kind of ineffective and useless.
Well, it's his dead eyes that I have a big problem with.
Yeah, couldn't they have given them better eyes? And there's nothing close-ups on the eyes, and there's just nothing there. It looks like, just like somebody painted some white and red on there.
It's very distracting. I feel like just nothing would have been better than that. Like, see, I mean, George Lucas, like, C-3PO, R2-D2, there are no eyes there. There may be some like eye sockets, but
yeah. And yet there's still some sort of genuine warmth and personality you get for them, whereas, yeah. So, and this movie, like I said, it doesn't really know what its tone is, because in some of it it's trying to do kind of like some of the existential stuff that you would see in like 2001: A Space Odyssey and stuff like that. Particularly the ending is kind of a bit of a ripoff / homage and stuff. But at the same time, they're like, oh, we want to make it like fun and adventurous like Star Wars. Which leads to a thing about the music. I think the score is very good, except for whenever it tries to be like more adventurous. Every time there's like a shootout scene, and it's like it's trying to be really triumphant and happy. I'm like, that doesn't fit. Like, just keep it all foreboding, keep it all menacing. Just all of it should stay menacing, because when they do menacing, it's right. And I just felt like, yeah, they have the scenes where they're having like a shootout with the robots and stuff like that, where like the music like comes in like up, bump, bump, like it's upbeat and stuff. Like, I don't think the upbeat stuff works at all. They should have just stayed. I know they're trying to balance it, but they shouldn't have. They should have just stayed with menacing, foreboding music throughout, because I think that works fine.
John Barry did the score.
Yes, that's at least another thing. So this movie is, directed by a guy that probably wondered how the hell he wound up in the position to direct it. His name was Gary Nelson, and he only directed 3 or 4 feature-length films. This was easily the biggest one. He also directed another Disney film, which was a big part of my childhood that I remember a lot, that I also had taped, which was the 1976 Freaky Friday.
Oh.
But so he gone from Freaky Friday to this, to space opera. So I feel like this was probably a director that was a little bit overmatched by the task he'd been given. I don't think the movie is necessarily poorly directed, but I don't know. You just wonder, like, Disney's throwing all this money. It's their biggest movie ever, and this is the guy they picked to direct. I mean, Disney had a stable of directors that they could count on, and I think this just, again, reflects the turmoil of the 70s and what was going on at the time. I couldn't find anything out, but I even get the suspicion, this is only conjecture, I could be wrong, that there might have been some better, more established directors that might have even turned them down. It's kind of how I feel. Again, I've got nothing to go on that except my own feeling. But it just seems so odd that this director, who had done so little beforehand and nothing on a big scale really, wound up with this tremendous task.
You would think that, the undertaking of this film, they would want someone who's at least worked on something similar.
Exactly.
But who knows, man? They weren't making the best decisions around that period of time, so they were like, "Hey, we've got this guy. He's our company man. Let's put him in there."
That's what I mean. Like, literally, the last thing he'd done was Freaky Friday 3 years before.
for Disney though. So maybe
For Disney, yes. As I said, he was one of their, as you said, yeah, he was one of their guys.
you
I
put
guess.
work and you get rewarded.
Yeah. Maybe that was the other thing too. Like being one of those guys, they probably didn't have to pay him very much. Maybe they were trying to, because of the budget, they were trying to save and not get a bigger name director who would demand a higher salary. And again, for all the failings and flaws of this movies, I don't lay too many at the director's feet because, as I said, it seems like the design is flawed, the script is certainly flawed, the cast is, for all its names, very kind of flat, and none of them are very memorable in their roles.
Ernest Borgnine really threw me off for the entire movie. I'll be honest. It's the dead eyes of that robot, Vincent, and then Ernest Borgnine really.
Ernest Borgnine's wide, wild eyes.
Because every time he spoke, I knew that was Ernest Borgnine. I'm like, I couldn't put it out of my mind because he's such a distinctive voice, and it really took me out of the film. And
he just seemed to be there basically to argue with everybody. Every time somebody said something, he would just like add some comment to it, usually because he disagreed. And in the end, he just turns out to be a coward that gets himself killed. Which is, I'll admit, you probably didn't see it coming.
That was really a sorry way to go out. He fixed an injury to his leg and just hops in this escape pod or whatever and just gets.
Then they shoot him
immediately.
So, I mean, I do give credit to the actor who played our villain. What was his name? Reinhardt. He's at least trying, and he's at least a somewhat interesting villain, even though we've seen it before. I think they're trying to do another nod to one of their previous movies, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He's kind of, I think, a nod to like a Captain Nemo type and stuff like that. And I do like the premise. So to let people know, we have these space explorers, and they're out in a part of space. They're on a specific mission. They're a part of space that supposedly no one else has been to yet. That's the point. And they come across this mysterious ship very close to a black hole. And all the lights are off and stuff. And they can't understand what it could be. And eventually, with their computer records, they identified it as a ship that had gone missing 20 years earlier. And with another little tie-in, the female doctor, her own father, had been part of the crew of that ship. So there's a little tie-in there. And as they get closer to the ship, it comes to life. They come on. It's very mysterious. At first, it's clear somebody's there, but they're hiding from them. Their weapons are taken away from them. They're greeted by just robots that don't speak. And eventually, Reinhardt reveals himself. And his story is that he was the captain of this ship. They'd had a specific mission. The government or whoever had deemed the mission a failure and ordered him to come back. And what people had always assumed for years was they were lost. But no, he just simply refused the order, didn't come back. And his story at this point was that only he and a handful of his crew decided to stay, where most of them decided to leave, and he had no idea what happened. He's like, well, they never made it back, and they said no. So anyway, over the years, he's been alone. He's obviously become very eccentric, and he's built up this small army of robots to serve all his needs, and none of them talk. And he's got sort of a right-hand man henchman, the very imposing, and this is the other thing that made a big impact on me as a kid, Maximilian. I was very scared of Maximilian as a kid, the way it hovered around, and that one, its dead eyes were fine. Didn't have a problem with it.
Sure.
And it also features, even though it's very brief, one of the most violent deaths you'll ever see in a Disney film. And it's funny because this is the first time I'd seen the movie in quite a few years. And you know how it is, that we often talk about how you remember things differently. I remember it as like being a lot slower and longer. But it's really only a couple seconds. Like, and then he falls down. For some reason, I could remember him just standing there and getting his insides shredded by a propeller. So yeah, that's one of the most violent deaths you'll ever see in a Disney movie, even if it is Touchstone or whatever like that. And so I do like the stuff with Maximilian. As soon as Maximilian shows up, they know that they're eventually going to have to deal with it. And Vincent, being another robot, I guess there's an instant rivalry between them. They have a somewhat disappointing climactic battle. That's the other thing about this movie. Like, I don't even mind the boring talky parts, which is most of it, because the action is so clunky. Like, the action is so clunky and disappointing.
I don't know. It's not. I've seen worse.
Yes, we definitely both seen worse. But it just mean, especially again, I don't mean to compare it directly to Star Wars, but I mean you have characters shooting at these robots that can barely move, that are just shooting lasers at them.
easier comparison to Star Trek, I think, because immediately that's what I was reminded of, because they're on a ship. There's lots of this herky jerky movement that they're all jerking around and steam being shot in their face and stuff. It just immediately reminded me of Star Trek. For that,
what's interesting is that this came out the same year as the first Star Trek film, and they both have kind of the same idea, in that both of them try really way too hard to be like 2001. Because if you remember Star Trek: The Motion Picture, that was all about like going to like the center of the universe and meeting like God or some weird being. And the good thing for the Star Trek movies is they kind of realized that was a mistake and got away from it in the later movies. But this movie does sort of a similar thing.
I don't care about the first very much.
Yeah, I don't think most people do. But this movie, again, I do like the premise. So we have this scientist, he's sort of sinister, and he's on this empty, derelict ship with an army of robots serving him. They're all silent and stuff, and he's studying the black hole. And it's funny because the movie's been roundly criticized for, even in 1979, like it kind of misrepresents what a black hole is and what it can do and stuff. But in one defense, I'll say, even today, as far as I know, in 2017, it is true that we don't actually know what happens to matter when it goes to a black hole. That is still a mystery.
Well, all theoretical still, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So we know a black hole is an event. It's a piece of space-time, which again is hard enough. Like, what is space-time? That's a whole thing. So this movie made me have to look up what a black hole was again, because I think I'm like most people. I have a vague, layman's terms definition of what it is and stuff. But it is true that black hole is one of the great crazy phenomenons and mysteries of the universe. It's very imposing. So I like that this movie's tackling. I like the sense of foreboding. It's like I don't know. It's like the ship on the edge of the world type thing. Because there's also ghost ship stuff in here, right? Like the idea of being out at sea and just coming across this big, supposedly empty vessel, and so it has a sort of vibe going on, and I like that very much. But what they wind up doing with it, I don't know.
So what was Reinhardt's plan? He wants to drive into the black hole? Is that his whole thing?
Yeah, that's really all it was. Like, they just happened to get there, like, right before he was ready to finally go in. The whole point was, like, over the 20 years, as he got more crazy and he studied it, you get the feeling he was cautious at first, and then he went kind of crazy over time, and he was just sort of like, to hell with whatever I'm studying, I'm just going to go in. As far as I know, is what happened. He was already kind of eccentric and stuff. Like he said, like, he refused the order because he was obsessed with the black hole. Like, he wasn't going to come back. He wanted to get his answers one way or another. And I guess
doesn't it just suck everything inside of it though? Like, if you're anywhere near it, it gets sucked in to the black hole. Isn't that the way it works? Like, it pulls it in.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, like, he calculated like the minimum safe distance. Like, get as close as you can without actually being part of it. So he's like hovering on the very edge of, I guess, is what's going on here. Okay. And then his idea eventually is, we don't really know what his studies are, right? Like, we don't know how he's studying it or what he's doing. We get to the point where he's like, to hell with all that, I'm just going to go in it and see what happens, which is fair enough, I guess. And yeah, so our heroes, our protagonists, they wind up at the same time. And of course, they find out all sorts of things. There's a vibe that's off right away. Although one of them, the doctor guy, he's sort of taken, like, Reinhardt has sort of been a hero of his, so he doesn't seem to notice how crazy he is. The other people are saying, like, he's off here, he's crazy. He's like, oh yeah, he's a little eccentric, but the man's a genius and stuff, and it winds up getting him killed. He's the one who was killed by Maximilian. So there's not really much to separate the characters. Like, he's sort of the academic, the captain,
generic white guy number 3.
The captain's just sort of the captain, and then there's a younger, more gung-ho guy. Like, he's young. He's kind of like their Johnny Storm. He does a little bit of the shooting and stuff,
Is that Joseph Bottoms?
I believe so. And then
Charles
there's and then of course, as we said, we have Roddy McDowall as the British smartass sounding robot out there to unlike C-3PO, he doesn't calculate probabilities and stuff. Instead, he just gives us quotes from a quote-a-day philosophy calendar or something like that.
Yeah.
And, he eventually finds an older model of his own make, and that is Bob, who's all beat up and busted and on the ship. And he's the one that sort of gives him the real lowdown of what's going on in the ship. And we find out that many of these robots that walk around actually aren't robots. They're like people that have been lobotomized or something and turned into like weird kind of like mindless cyborgs and very ghoulish. Again, pretty weird and out there for a Disney movie. There's a cool scene where, you know, the younger guy is following them, and he sees that they have sort of a funeral for one of the ones that had died. They're very solemn, carrying a coffin, and then they shoot it out into the black hole, which I thought was kind of cool. And he reports back like how, you know, that's an odd thing for like robots to do, and then you find out the truth. And this fate had even befallen, I believe, her father. It happened. Is that what happened? So yeah, he actually wound up murdering his own crew, murdering some of them, and I don't know, lobotomizing others, and turning them into weird robot slaves, which is pretty dark territory for Disney.
Yeah, I was on board. They should have shown her dad.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah, she should have had a scene where she like found him.
That's like, probably too dark for Disney.
I guess so. Although this movie really pushes the envelope as far as that goes. But yeah, but as we said, everything about the look and stuff is just so generic. Nothing's gonna be memorable. Like you know, the robots. You know, they're not like stormtroopers. They're just shuffling little robots. You know, there's nothing too memorable with them. There's nothing too memorable with the blasters they use or anything like that. I know they were really hoping for merchandising with stuff like Bob and Vincent, but they're not bad. But as you said, they're weird, sort of dead eyes or kind of off-putting.
The accent on Bob is just is beyond. It's too much. Too much.
I guess they were just trying to create some sort of contrast. I don't know.
They achieved that.
Yeah, but a little too much. One thing that's notable is that this movie, I assume you watched it online like I did, and you can't find the version, but I guess if you buy it on DVD, you can see it as it was released theatrically when it was released. It's one of the last movies ever to have like an overture at the start, which would be an extended musical, you know, an extended musical number before over the credits before the movie actually starts, which was a big thing in old-time movies. You know, you'd see it in like Gone with the Wind and stuff like that. And those movies would even have, you know, some of those longer movies like Gone with the Wind, they would have an intermission, and they'd play music for like 10 minutes for that. This movie is one of the last movies to do that. To this day, I've never seen that. I've only seen this movie as it appeared on TV, on Family Channel when I saw it. But I guess if you buy it, you can get it. I'd be interested in just hearing it. Maybe you can see it on YouTube somewhere.
Did the version you watched, it had like 3 minutes of just, the screen was completely dark, but there was score. The score slowly built, and then it went to that green...
yeah, see, that's a piece of
thing.
I don't think that's all of it, but that's some of the overture. That's what it is. That's what they're talking about. Yeah, what's funny is like the green stuff, which looks so crappy and primitive. At the time, it was the longest like computer-generated shot in movie history at the time. You know, before Disney would break their own record with Tron. So even in a movie that was mostly unmemorable and bad, Disney was at least breaking some new ground here, which is kind of cool. But yeah, the ship's called the Cygnus. They fly on the Palomino, and they Cygnus. My favorite thing about the movie is the Cygnus. I just like the idea of this sort of like weird, almost dead, empty Hulk hovering at the edge of kind of oblivion because it's a black hole. I like that idea very much, even if they don't necessarily do enough with it. You know, it's a short movie. It's only about an hour and a half long. And it does have, it could be even shorter because there's a few, like the opening and stuff doesn't need, it is sort of slow, and it has all sorts of slow moments.
I was totally on board with the film, and then when they actually board the Cygnus, it's like 20 minutes of just nonstop useless dialogue. It just doesn't. It's really boring. It slows the whole movie down.
Exactly, and this is, I think, you know, the really big thing that makes it fall if you're trying to compare it to like Star Wars. Star Wars, as we said, is fast, it moves around, and it's colorful and adventurous, whereas this movie is about landing on one ship in very drab surroundings and then sitting around and talking.
See, what Star Wars did so well was that opening crawl. I was reading something the other day that was talking about, someone had mentioned to George Lucas to do the crawl because they're just, you know, thrown in this world. You have no, you know, it's just a way to throw out exposition quickly, which I think is good in a way.
Yeah.
Because, you know, without having all this, you know, dialogue in between each other.
Yeah. So this movie's like main feature is dialogue. It's scenes of people talking. I don't hate all of it. I like it towards the end when he invites them to his dinner. I really love that whole scene in the sort of like this weird, elegant looking room with a window that looks right out into the black hole. I like that very much. Again, I don't think they do enough with it, but because by this time they've already revealed too much by this time anyway. By this time, anybody in the audience knows this guy's crazy and is gonna, try to off them or kill them all or make them go with him and stuff. So it's not as well done as it could be, but I still really enjoy the idea, at least, of that scene, this elegant table and chandelier and all this stuff, and they're sitting down to eat meals, from vegetables and stuff that he's grown. You get to see in the ship he's got little farms and stuff to make his own food, which is kind of interesting. And then the view of the black hole, a journey that begins where everything ends. I mean, sounds good, but.
These robots look so stupid.
Yeah. So for years they've been talk of a remake, which I think would be cool. At least give it another shot. This movie's so flawed, so I mean, why not? Try to take the concept and do it again. And there's been years of the guy that directed Tron Legacy of doing it. That doesn't seem like a bad idea, but as far as I know, it's in development hell. It's been on hold as of 2016. Because somebody wrote a script. What was his name? John Spottis? I don't know. He wrote a script. He's also the guy that wrote Prometheus. He wrote a script for this, and it was considered too dark. So it would be even darker than what this was.
I think it needs to be dark. I think that's what it was lacking. Was
If you ask me, I would mind a remake of this. Disney should just sell it, give it to somebody else to remake.
Yeah, I definitely don't. Because, I mean, generally you do a remake for name recognition, right? For people like, oh, wow, yeah, I remember that.
I know. But see, that's what I like about this. This isn't a cash-in. This is taking a movie that wasn't very good but had some good ideas and actually maybe trying to do it better.
I think that's when remakes need to exist.
Yeah. This is the scenario where I think a remake, why not? It would be a good try. I think there's lots of things about this movie that had potential that mostly did not work, that a remake might be able to fix. Did you see on the Wikipedia page towards the bottom, they show what the soundtrack album was supposed to look like? There's this awesome picture of a totally trippy psychedelic colored record, vinyl. But apparently they couldn't release it. It looks like it would have been an awesome thing to have, though. As I said, I like the soundtrack a lot. The only stuff I don't like is the more upbeat stuff. I feel like they shouldn't have done anything upbeat. Just keep the main theme and all that bleak stuff and all that foreboding, menacing stuff. I think it all sounds very powerful and good. It's one of those times where good music and cover over a not very good movie's flaws. And I think there's a few times where the music really helps the action along and makes it seem bigger and better than what's happening. That being said, what I said about the action being clunky, there are a couple sequences that aren't so bad. I really like the meteor shower towards the end when all these meteors build, and there's a shot where they all have to run across this bridge while one of the large meteors comes in and obliterates everything. They even fall and have to get up. It's fairly suspenseful. I like that shot a lot. But yeah, John Barry, he did a lot of stuff. I'm just trying to find a quicker.
He passed away in 2011.
I mean, John Barry's most known for, he's the one who wrote the main James Bond theme. Mm-hmm. That's definitely his main legacy. But I mean, he did all sorts of good stuff. British guy, obviously.
So he did a lot of the Bond stuff.
He did a lot of the Bond stuff. Yeah, he worked on a lot of the original Bonds, and yeah, we all know how every Bond film has its own theme that was done by an artist. But the very first one, Dr. No didn't. For that one, it was simply the main theme that's da 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 da. That's John Barry.
It's like he also did Dances with Wolves.
Yeah, that's another very well. I don't remember it very well, but that's a very well acclaimed soundtrack too. So yeah, very respected. It's kind of the opposite of the director, because here's a guy that's had a long, illustrious career. I mean, he's just all over the place. He's done probably dozens of films. But yeah, there's some really interesting ones. He did Midnight. Right? What's that?
Peggy Sue Got Married.
Oh, yeah, which is a film we did. Yeah, some really odd little things in here, too. Oh, shit, I just lost it. Somewhere in Time was the next movie he did after this, which is kind of funny.
Did Midnight
But
Cowboy.
he did Game of Death, the last uh, shit.
Bruce Lee?
Bruce Lee,
No.
yeah, he did Game, which is interesting. And what's funny is like the last score he ever did was rejected, and it was for The Incredibles.
Oh, wow.
In fact, like his last like 3 or 4 scores were rejected. So maybe he didn't. Maybe he'd lost something over the years. I don't know, but shouldn't take away from it. A really good body of work. Out of Africa, that was another big movie. Funny as he followed that up with Howard the Duck, because I mean that's what it is when you're a film composer. You just take the jobs you're given. I'm sure.
Exactly.
But I do. I mean, there's a lot of these films I've seen, and so I still would say this is one of his better. Oh man, he did one of the worst movies I've ever seen, which came out the year after this. It's called Raise the Titanic, which is exactly about that. It's about how a bunch of like scientists or whatever find the Titanic. Remember, this is 5 years. This is 1980. This is 5 years before the Titanic was actually found. So at that point, and they didn't. And in this, it was intact. Of course, when it was found, it was in 2 pieces. And it's all about like the efforts of trying to raise it. And it's a boring ass, terrible movie. And I have no idea why I watched it, but I watched it years ago, and it's awful, man. But he did the score for that.
Stuff.
John Barry. Anyway, yeah, it's interesting. John Barry's all over the place, but yeah, he'll definitely be most remembered for James Bond. But so yeah, I mean, as far as plot goes, there's not very much to it, and when we get to it, of course, eventually, what's going to happen is we are going to go through the black hole, and it's maybe a little predictable, but at the same time surprising too, because basically they show a vision that looks very much like hell. And they do have one really creative moment. The idea is like, so before they go through the black hole, what's happened is the ship gets bombarded by these asteroids. So the ship itself is more or less destroyed. And Reinhardt is just pulled through space through the black hole, and so is Maximilian, the evil robot, after a last standoff with Vincent. And what's funny and what's interesting is once they both get through the black hole, they combine. He's like inside Vincent somehow, and there's this really in the shot that I remember the most from the movie is him inside Vincent standing on this blasted hellscape. And you're thinking, this is a Disney movie? Like, my God. And then eventually, as we go through all the fires burning in Hellscape, we eventually see like a lit door up high, and you go through like this long glass corridor. You're following this angelic figure into white light, and that's obviously a path to heaven and stuff. So anyway, all that crashes through, but there's like a little escape ship that our surviving heroes have to go through, and they're forced to. They find out it's got like preset coordinates, and like they have to go through the black hole, and that part's not very creative. It's just, oh, it's trippy and stuff's going upside down and stuff is echoing and it's going inside out and stuff. And then eventually all that happens is they emerge through on the other side, whatever that is. If there is another side of the black hole, who knows? And they're flying towards a planet near a star. And that's it. And the music makes it sound like everything's going to be okay, but I don't know why it would be. They're extremely far from Earth now, in a ship that definitely doesn't have enough fuel or power to get there. So I guess maybe that lit planet is some representation of heaven or promised land. They're going to wind up there. I don't know. Sometimes we think movies that have like ambiguous endings are good, and this one, I don't know. I feel like it could have given us something.
We need that robot to give us some more Chinese proverbs.
He only did 5 or 6.
Yeah, kind of underwhelming.
Yeah, for sure. Underwhelming as a whole. Again, like you can totally understand why it didn't perform the way they wanted it to, and why it's mostly forgotten now. A while ago we did one of my favorite overlooked movies, Empire of the Sun, and that's a movie where, again, we can see some of the reasons why it would have been overlooked, but I think we both felt it was such a strong movie that it was still kind of confusing. This movie, you really kind of get it. You're like, okay. Like, I still like the movie. I'm happy to have seen it again, and I really wanted to do it and talk about it, especially as it relates to Disney, because it was an interesting time. Disney of sort of the 70s were a dark era for Disney, and this movie kind of shows maybe a bit of their desperation, I think, in trying to try something really new and bold and different. And again, I give them credit for trying.
Yeah. This is one that I would have turned off had we not had the show on it because it was just too damn boring. The dialogue was just
The whole middle section
yeah.
is just a bunch of blabbing.
I mean, I was very
And
much bored before that, you know, and then it just oh man, not just not something I want to see really, or I mean, I don't think anyone wanted to see.
Yeah, I know I have a certain amount of bias that comes from my memories of the movie. I still enjoy it, but as I said, I'm fully aware of all its flaws and the things that make it not enjoyable and not memorable, all that stuff. And that's what I think is interesting. Is it's like Disney kind of, I'm not really sure what was their intent or what made them decide to do this kind of movie at that time. It was the biggest budget Disney movie ever at the time, and it was completely different than what they'd done before, and it was ambitious and mostly just a failure.
I think Roy Disney said, "Hey, we
he's
need
dead
a new Star Wars." Oh, he's already dead. Okay,
he's already dead. That's what I'm saying. So at this point, this is when
whoever the hell is in charge.
Ron Miller is in charge at this point. So as I said, this is when Ron Miller, who was Walt's son-in-law, he married Walt's daughter. He was in charge, and a lot of people felt like he made a lot of bad decisions through the 70s. And here's just sort of one more.
So we need our Star Wars. Star Wars makes money. We need that. I think was the logic there. I mean, there's tons of really bad Star Wars ripoffs, you know.
Oh yeah,
Ice Pirates and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay, so I thought he was throughout the 70s. He only came in and he only had a brief tenure. He was from 78 to 84. So, what did Disney do that was memorable in that time? Like nothing, except I guess Tron. Like when he was actually in charge. I mean, he worked at Disney before that, obviously. Marrying the boss's daughter gets you a good in. But he was CEO from 78 to 84, and I really can't think of anything really significant from that time that was except for Tron, which at the time was another failure. Because that movie you get though, that movie was totally ahead of its time. It was a movie that most people just couldn't understand or relate to in '82, but became sort of a cult classic and is remembered very fondly now. Whereas this movie is either forgotten or it's just remembered as being a debacle. And that's kind of how Miller's tenure as CEO is remembered, a debacle. That he was just there. I mean, and this is when there was all sorts of. It's funny now, again in hindsight, because nowadays Disney is as powerful as it's ever been, and pretty much what it loves to do now is acquire things because it can. But that's what Disney was faced with during his tenure. Was that corporate raiders trying to buy up Disney at the time, and they were constantly trying to fight that off. However that goes, there were takeover attempts, and there were a lot of shareholders that were kind of right to criticize him in the direction the company was going in. But it's kind of good that they didn't succeed because they didn't have a solution for it other than kind of breaking Disney apart. Like Disney could have ended. They could have just sold it off to different shareholders and people and just, which would have been a horrible thing. So the main thing you can say about Miller is that he didn't do much, but he at least kept them afloat.
That is crazy to think that, of how Disney is now to where, they were just hanging on back then.
Yeah, they really were. And what's funny is also when they were just hanging on back then, they actually had some talent, but they didn't realize what they had. Now, when it came to somebody like Don Bluth, I don't think they had any say. I think they knew he was talented. He wanted to go. He had to go. But also John Lasseter was there, and they more or less, put him in a little corner. Now, that's when he was quite young, so I don't know. And I mean, and in the early '80s, they fired Tim Burton because he was too weird for them. He made that. What was it? He made Frankenweenie with their money. They looked at it and said, "This is what you did with our money," and kicked him out.
Oh man!
And years later, Disney would reappropriate some of the stuff. Even a few, not even that many years later. To this day, the Nightmare Before Christmas is a Disney thing because in that short time, they recognized his talent, and yeah, but it's funny. So, but they could have had him throughout the '80s. Instead, they kicked him out.
So they missed out on Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands. Wait, no, it's '90s.
No, they missed out on Edward Scissorhands too.
Okay, yeah.
That's not Disney, is it?
No, I don't believe so.
Yeah,
but I think it may be '90s though.
It's 1990.
Oh, okay. Feels newer than that. Great movie.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's hard unless you really know the more in-depth history of Disney. If you're just like more like me and just know some of the names, like most of the stuff you know is just sort of like negative anyway. Because after Miller, what we've got, I mean, when he was ousted in '84, he was replaced by a triumvirate. It was instead of one person, it was three, and that would have been Michael Eisner, Frank Wells, and Jeffrey Katzenberg. People don't remember them fondly either. But they actually were present when the company turned itself around. Now, did that have much to do with them? I don't think so. Michael Eisner was upset about how there was swearing and stuff in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Like, if they listened to Michael Eisner, they would have completely changed Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is like the main movie that inspired the turnaround. So I don't really know exactly how that works. And Miller still has producing credits in some of those films from that era that where again they were just going in the wrong direction. Because it's funny, like in 1979 we have this movie come out. It's the first ever PG Disney film. There's no Touchstone at the time. And then in 1985 they tried to do it again with a PG film, but this time they do it with an actually animated film, which is almost unthinkable, and that's The Black Cauldron. The Black Cauldron is PG, and it is. And if you compare, and it's not dark, but if you compare it to, in general terms, it's not dark. But if you compare it to the average full-feature animated movie that Disney's so known for, it's super dark. And it's another movie that I'm fascinated with because it's The Black Cauldron is, one of those sort of black sheep movies. It's kind of like Disney's kind of embarrassed they did it in the first place because it was sort of because it was so far off from their usual brand. That might even be worth visiting at some time. But it was Ron Miller who did create Touchstone. That would have been in '83. And he did have some sort of what's the word? Like courage. Although again, I don't know if that's desperation or not. But he was somewhat of an innovator because he wanted to fund a movie like this. He wanted to fund a movie like Tron. And even though it's funny, the people that replaced him would kick Tim Burton out. He's the one that hired Burton. So he seemed to be at least have an eye on the future, like upcoming stuff. Like he did seem to believe in it, and then he was ousted, and yet so maybe he's not nearly as bad as people remember. It's just all the timing worked out. Because if we said, I don't think that those three guys, Katzenberg, I don't think they did anything that great. They were just kind of there when things were turning around. But again, I'd have to look a lot more in depth into this to find out who exactly was making decisions about what and stuff. I know I'm speaking in very general terms, and I don't need to make a bunch of assumptions and make a bunch of conjecture here. And maybe if anybody wants to fact check me and tell me something I'm wrong, go ahead. I'm going to look into it a little more in depth. But the main thing you can see from that era, from Ron Miller's time into the mid '80s, is that Disney was in turmoil. There was a lot of leadership problems. There was a lot of problems determining the direction, and that's why we get movies like this to a certain extent. Although at the same time, I kind of applaud it because some of these movies are daring, even if they weren't successful in the end.
It almost seems like a lot of companies were in a similar situation. They didn't know what the next big thing was going to be, throwing stuff at the wall, trying to see what was going to stick.
Sure.
Till Spielberg hit the scene with all of his, E.T. I know was a big one right around the early '80s.
Exactly.
'82 is when that came out.
Yeah.
Have you seen The Watcher in the Woods?
No.
That's actually a really good film. I'd recommend that one to you. It's one of the few Disney horror movies.
Wow.
That came out in 1980. and it's got some pretty terrifying moments for I believe it's PG.
Yeah, I remember the poster. It's a really good poster. I know what it is, but I've never actually seen it. It was based on a young adult novel, I think, that was fairly popular at the time. But I've never actually seen it. But you're right, it's another one of the more sort of forgotten ones, and this was one of the ones that Ron Miller would have been a producer on, because it's 1980. See, this is just when they started up the Buena Vista.
Okay.
They did Buena Vista about 3 or 4 years before they did Touchstone. As far as I can tell, Touchstone just more or less took over what Buena Vista had been doing. Again, my understanding of this is tenuous, so maybe I'm not correct.
I remember Touchstone releasing much more adult-type movies.
Yeah. And that was its purpose. Like, that was the idea.
Just so it's not under the Disney moniker, it's under a completely different.
Right. That was the purpose, and that was very much what Miller himself was pushing for. He was instrumental, I guess, in creating that. And I think part of that had to do with the reception of the Black Hole, where people were just like, this is Disney? Oh, it's like, okay, well, maybe we need to distance Disney name from this a little bit. We can still profit from it, make money from it, but maybe it's better if we... Because it is really weird, especially... I mean, didn't it feel weird watching those opening credits and like seeing like Walt Disney like creep across the screen and like those dark like orange letters against the black sky with the weird foreboding music playing and stuff? Like, you're like, this is Disney? Like, it just seems so, well, dark. I mean, I hate to just keep using the word, but
I feel like if they had gone further in that direction and maybe released it under a different company, whatever, and made it even more dark, and a little bit more adult oriented, I think it would have been a lot better movie.
See, I think that's really where it fails, right? Is the Star Wars impact, where it's like, oh, we need to just to compete with Star Wars, so we're gonna have some laser battles and we're gonna have goofy robots and stuff and make it fun. Where that stuff just seems out of place in this sort of movie. I think that's exactly right. I think the movie, it was going in a dark direction and they didn't embrace it fully when they should have.
So that's the most interesting parts about it. They just kind of glossed over.
Mm-hmm.
So,
just like the ending could have been a lot longer and better, but it seemed almost like, okay, let's just end this thing. They go through, some stuff happens, roll credits,
Yeah. Or, she could have seen her father, turned into a cyborg.
Yeah, and you get the idea that this is the type of thing where it's like, oh, this is a Disney movie. We shouldn't explore that sort of territory, which is stupid because this movie is bringing up these questions. You're already delving into the territory. So, yeah, it seems like a movie that, like, can't finish what it starts in a way. It brings up some interesting subject matter and stuff. It brings it up, but then it won't actually delve into it or tackle it or explore it fully, I think.
It's kind of hard for us to understand, too, because now I think a lot of kid-oriented entertainment deals with a lot of these type themes and darker content.
Sure.
So it's just hard to even imagine that. I mean, this is, not geared at children, but probably geared at young adults.
Yeah.
Teenagers, young adults. So
that's the other thing, right? Like, stuff like this isn't that strange nowadays. But 1979 was just a complete oddity. Like, and coming under the Disney label or whatever, there was just no place for it, and
audience.
Yeah, and it was relegated, which is unfortunate. It's unfortunate that they clearly made some executive decisions to try to make it compete with Star Wars and make people think of Star Wars when they should have just, owned it as a completely unique property that had its own. But I mean, it still made a decent amount of money. But yeah, it's never barely been well received critically. It got some praise for its effects and cinematography. But yeah, one of the things I find frustrating is like, yeah, you have some of these metaphysical and even quasi-religious things brought up, but then they're not really explored. It's like they backed away from it, which is too bad.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, I think it would have been really powerful if she could have like found her father and unmasked one of those things. Like they do have an unmasking where they find out, oh, this is the person, but it's just some person. It would have been cool if she could have stumbled upon her father somewhere and stuff, and he could have given a little more detail about what exactly happened. They do so much exposition, and yet it feels like that part's almost too vague.
He's also uncredited, the guy who's unmasked.
But yeah, I'd really like to see the full overture, which I mean is just which is simply music over opening credits is all it is. But I don't know, that kind of thing interests me because by 1979 that was already a thing that didn't really happen anymore.
Yeah, especially nowadays. People don't really care about score anymore, do they?
Yeah, I don't know.
They're allowed to be, pull a Martin Scorsese and just put rock and roll music over everything.
Not to mention this film didn't just come out in the same year as Star Trek. It came out in the same month. So you can just imagine, you're a sci-fi fan. Which one are you going to see? You're going to say Star Trek because you know what Star Trek is. You watched the show.
Wow, that is terrible planning.
Like what the hell is the black hole? Well, it's something that Disney's doing. That seems weird. You could totally understand why you'd be like, no, I'm going to go see Star Trek, thanks. You know, even though the Star Trek movie is not much better.
You know, Psycho? The guy in Psycho, he's in Black Hole, so let's go check that out.
Oh yeah, Psycho, like 20 years ago. That's what I mean. Like they have some names in there, but they're kind of faded names.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ernest Borgnine's character sucks. He's just there to like make quips and like disagree with everybody. Like somebody will say something, and then he'll just add something to it, like to show that like he disagrees or something, and then that's it. He'll be like, I don't know about that, or we better hope this works. You know, he's just a bunch of useless crap. And then in the end, he just proves himself to be a complete coward, and he dies. Which, I mean, I guess it's fitting in a way, but it's like, couldn't you made a better character? I don't know. This is interesting. 8-inch magnetic figures were made of Vincent, Star, and Maximilian. Like, I wonder how much those go for on eBay. I like how Star, who's just in there to like lose a shooting contest, is like one of the things they thought they should push. Like they even make a point of pointing it out. It's like, oh, Star, yeah, he used to be pretty cool, but then they built Maximilian, and now there's no use for him anymore. So Star's just in there to like wave his guns, and Vincent's kind of dirty, like accidentally on purpose shooting him.
Yeah.
This was before they knew anything about Reinhardt murdering people. Vincent's just kind of being petty.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of merchandise put out for this film.
Which makes sense because Disney had merchandising behind pretty much all their stuff, and that was the other thing that Star Trek had brought in '77 was like that merchandising was a big deal. Star Trek, like the merchandising it did, like completely changed the landscape. Almost everything that came out in the '80s was because like merchandise style was like because Star Trek proved how good merchandise and how successful it could be. Plus the lesson Fox learned by letting Lucas have the rights and making a boatload of money off it.
I was just saying you're talking about Star Wars, right? Yeah,
sorry, I said Star Trek, didn't I? Yeah, Star Wars. I think I said this before on the show. Like that's why He-Man even exists. Like Kenner was making all this money with the Star Wars toy. They just came to some designer and like, look, for Hasbro, just make something super generic and whatever. Just and that's why he even called it He-Man, to keep it generic. And that's where that's where the whole show came from. It was just so they could sell toys to compete directly with Kenner's Star Wars line.
That formula like worked all through the 80s though. Like look at these things that they originally started as toys and they made a cartoon around like some cool toy design.
Yep.
Like some of my favorite things.
Same here. I mean, nobody's better at than Hasbro.
Yeah.
He-Man and Transformers, of course, G.I. Joe, whoever the hell it was that made My Little Pony. Those were all the shows were glorified commercials to sell toys.
Yeah.
And in some of the episodes, it really showed. And in some of the episodes, you're actually surprised by the quality. As I said, I've always been a big fan of Transformers, and I own a lot of them on DVD now. And it's funny, you watch some of the episodes, and you're like, that's surprisingly good. And then you watch other episodes, and you're like, yeah, that's, terrible, forgettable bullshit. Yeah. But that was the other thing about, I know we've talked a lot about the animation and the direction it would go in the 80s and stuff like that. But that was the other thing was like that. It was quantity over quality. Like you couldn't even get, if you back in the 80s, like to any American network, if you were going to like say pitch an animated show, you had to have 65 episodes to start. They didn't approve anything less. If it wasn't going to be 65 episodes, they didn't care.
That's shocking, man.
Yeah. Because they wanted to play it more than once a week.
But think of the just filler added to that stuff. That's why we have so much crap cartoons in that period of time.
But it also, I'm sure I talked about it before because it's always interesting, is when we talk about some of the anime that came over, the very first wave that came over that was disguised like it wasn't anime. The biggest one is Robotech. Robotech was 3 different shows. Why was it 3 different shows? Because of the 65 episode rule. Macross didn't have 65 episodes. So Harmony Gold went and found 2 other completely unrelated shows, smashed them together so they could get up to the 65 limit part. But in a way, it actually kind of worked out because they had to use some real creativity to come up with a way to make 3 shows that had nothing to do with each other all follow the same plot. Which is why, like, Robotech is one of the very few times I actually applaud the weird sort of Americanization of a Japanese anime. I mean, they're good on their own anyway, but I actually think it's kind of really creative what they wound up doing with the Robotech saga. But that was the reason. It was because back in those days, the networks wouldn't accept anything under 65 episodes. And as you said, it led to just a bunch of filler bullshit.
Oh, man. Yeah, it explains a lot, really. There would be maybe 5 terrible episodes for every 1 good episode.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as I said, I love Transformers always, but it was like maybe the best example of the time of that, where you just have like episodes where almost nothing happens and nothing's going on and stuff, and then
like G.I. Joe, trying to think of stuff around that period of time. All similar. Like Thundercats is what immediately came to mind, talking about the toys. And that was actually LJN. I didn't realize that. Back when LJN still made toys.
Yeah, it's because 65 episodes equals 13 weeks, which is roughly 1 episode per weekday. Like, so 5 days a week. That's why it was back then, and that's how it did. That's how it did that. By the time you got into the 90s, that started to change, but that basically dominated the 80s landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so let's see. I'm just trying to look at a list here of ones that had at least 65 episodes for the first season. The Teddy Ruxpin Show, The Gummy Bear Show, which was a Disney show, and one of the first shows to really use a bigger budget as a precursor to DuckTales, which would turn the whole thing around, the animation renaissance. That was 5 full seasons, 65 episodes each.
Wow.
Man, like, crazy. But, like, there's some stuff from the 90s, too, that did it, too. Let's see. Oh, here's a show from the 80s I used to watch that was garbage. Brave Star.
Mm-hmm.
Like a space cowboy.
Yeah.
Yeah, a few of the Disney ones used it. They did that with Chippendale Rescue Rangers. That's how the GoBots went.
So I don't even remember the GoBots cartoon. I had the toys, but I don't remember the cartoon.
The cartoon is really bad. It makes Transformers look like amazing high art. GoBots is fucking terrible. Like I tried to watch a few episodes a few months ago on like some cartoon site, and I was like, my god! Like, I mean, yeah. I mean, if you watch Transformers and think, oh, this is childish, or this is for little kids and not much effort's put into it, you'll get a new appreciation for it if you attempt to watch fucking GoBots, because GoBots is, man, it's so lame. And they don't even like bother to like give like names or personalities to half the characters. I mean, Transformers, the problem was they had to keep selling new toys, so they keep introducing new characters, even though it's completely nonsensical. It's like, where are they all coming from? And the other thing was, since there was never time to like give characters proper, personalities, there wasn't enough time, but they wanted to keep them distinct. They always had to give them like weird ways of talking, which led to 3 characters who spoke in rhyme. Jazz spoke in rhyme, Blaster spoke in rhyme, and Wheelie spoke in rhyme. 3 characters who speak in rhyme. That's awful. And just weird things, like the one who, I can't remember who it was, but he was the Autobot tank. he would just like yell sound effects at the end of sentences. He'd be like, "We got to go over there, whammo," and stuff like that. You're like, what the hell? But that was like the only thing they could think to do to try to make them sound distinct from each other, is give them like weird quirks. But yeah, Gem 65 episode seasons. My Little Pony 65 episode seasons. He-Man, of course. My Little Pony. Police Academy show. Oh my god, that was a terrible show. Police Academy. I remember those toys really well. The Police Academy toys.
Me too.
I think they were maybe the same people that made the Ghostbusters toys because they were extremely similar. They were really the same.
I'm actually looking at Ghostbusters now. The first season only had like 10 episodes, and the second season had 65.
Yeah. But yeah, you right into the 90s. They had it for a while. Like the Spider-Man animated series from the 90s I watched, that was 65 episodes per season. And that ran right into like 97? So that's a pretty later example, I think. That's still my favorite Spider-Man show, despite the weird limitations they had. But yeah, that was how it worked back then. 65 episode rule.
And the real Ghostbusters, 65 for the second season, and then it goes to like 13, and then 21, season 5. So I don't really understand. Obviously, they weren't happy with that 65 number run. So
probably wasn't sustainable. I mean, it's hard for like these shows that did like 5 seasons of 65 episodes. Like, wow, that was because their toys were selling.
It's like BBC series versus American series. You'll have an American series run 10 seasons, making 20 episodes a season, and BBC will cut it off after 3 seasons
of like 6 episodes each.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is a much better way to go as far as making quality programs.
Quality over quantity.
Which we're talking about the 80s here, so they definitely wanted quantity over quality.
Oh yeah, especially as we said, given what animation was at the time. Animation was still for kids and about selling toys and stuff. So it's just more.
I have so many fond memories of the cartoons, though, but they're absolute trash.
Well, as I said, like, though, at least some of those ones, like Transformers, they did have their moments. Yeah. As you said, maybe 5 bad episodes, there'd still be a good one in there and stuff like that. So, I mean, even amongst all that, and as I said, because I'm dying to talk about it for real for a full episode sometime, we'll talk about maybe that era of animation and stuff. And, because, yeah, I'll shit on, say, the 60s through the 80s. The 60s through the 80s was when animation was, really disrespected. It was when, in the West particularly, it was when, it was all for kids, the budget, I remember one of our last episodes, I was even saying, like, how it was, like, so much worse than what came before. Like, there's no comparison to watching, like, Superman on, like, Super Friends in the 60s and the Superman Max Fleischer cartoons from the 40s. They look so much better, and they're from 25 years earlier. Different era, different priorities, different mindset. That's the other thing, because like people thought, oh, it took so long for animation to get respect and be seen that it's not just for kids. Well, it actually kind of had that vibe in the 40s. There were plenty of audiences in the 40s that liked animation, and they weren't all kids. Like, so it's not as simple as that. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. Perhaps we'll do a proper show for that, so that we don't just hijack every show and get into it so much, because it is really interesting.
I have fond memories, and I'm just going through a list now, and it's just so many.
As I said, I always look at something like Hanna-Barbera as like the best example of that era, with its throwaway fare and stuff. But to be fair, there's still some good stuff in there, and even some of the stuff that's forgettable. It just has a weird charm to it. The main one for me, of course, is Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo is the laziest, most formulaic show of all time. But there was still something about its style and its characters and stuff that made you kind of just like it. And I was like,
I think the kids would call it meta, because it was like self-aware of what it was, and like like you're waiting for it to become really cliche,
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh, here it is, you damn dirty kids, every episode.
I mean, Scooby-Doo went through, how many different versions were there? There was like at least like 6 or 7 different Scooby-Doos, several being as recent as a few years ago. There was one from like 2010s called What's New Scooby-Doo. It had like its song was done by like Simple Plan. But
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. The worst one I remember was part of the 70s. It was the one where they threw out most of the cast. Now it was just Scooby, Shaggy, and Scooby, Shaggy, and Daphne for some reason. Because I guess Daphne's hot. I don't know. But they threw out Fred and Velma, and that was when they introduced, the most hated character of all time, possibly Scrappy. That was just awful. And what was even worse was they added a character who was almost as bad as Scrappy. I can't remember his name, but he was a kid, like a boy.
Oh.
And he had that voice. I know you know the voice. You've heard it throughout Hanna-Barbera cartoons, and I hate it more than time itself. I'll show it to you later. It shows up all over Hanna-Barbera. It's even in Yogi's Christmas special, which is the only Yogi Bear thing I've ever watched. That's, again, another example of Hanna-Barbera that I hate. I hate the Yogi Bear cartoons so much. I hated it as a kid. I hate it now. Wasn't it funny how sometimes when they would re-air Scooby-Doo, like the original, sometimes it had a laugh track?
Yeah.
It didn't always, but sometimes it did.
The Flintstones did too.
Yeah, the worst thing with a laugh track I've ever seen is the Flintstones. Just like this canned laughter after like every line.
It's
none of which are funny. I don't care. Don't talk about aging. I don't care. If I was alive in 1960, it still wouldn't have been funny. That's not good humor. There's nothing funny about just this being made of rocks or whatever. That's not funny. I'm talking about lazy.
They would be laughing like in the opening credits. Like they'd be laughing like when he's gets locked out of the house.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the worst laugh track I've ever seen in my life.
Oh man, and I think I mentioned this before. When I was a kid, I didn't understand like what a laugh track was. And I was like, so did they just like show this on a screen to a bunch of people and record them laughing at it? Like I didn't understand the concept.
Yeah.
Like, I watched Cheers, and okay, this is filmed in front of a live studio audience, so I didn't know if maybe they did something similar, like played it for a live studio audience. But
I don't even honestly what is the reasoning behind it? Taking an already existed animating show that has already aired, airing it again, but this time just throwing in a laugh track.
I'd love to know. People must, I guess, cues for when to laugh.
Yeah, I guess.
I get it.
Oh, I get it. Fred is eating those ribs, and they're really big.
Oh, that's a big ass bird. I get it.
That pelican doesn't like his job.
That's not a garbage disposal. It's a bird or whatever.
The Flintstones live in a world of horrific animal abuse, and we just laugh at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But do you remember Scooby-Doo had a cousin that was pink, I think?
Yep.
And he had a really stupid voice too.
Yep. I can't remember his name, but yep, I do.
It almost sounded like
no, I have to find out.
One of the other characters. Yep.
Yeah, that's what he said, wasn't it? Here we go. List of Scooby-Doo characters.
Oh no, the pink one was a girl. I'm thinking of
he was gray, or he was gray.
Oh man,
was he gray?
He had like buck teeth.
There's one called Scooby Dumb who was gray and had buck teeth. Yeah, that's Scooby Dumb.
Scooby Dumb.
There's a white one called Yabadoo. I don't remember him at all. I have no idea where he came from. What? Yabadoo is a great white Dane. His adventures take place out west, where he fights crime with his master, a bubbling deputy named Deputy Dusty. And Scrappy-Doo is on that show, too, whatever the hell show that was.
Scrappy-Doo, Scooby-Dum, Yabadoo, and Scooby-Dee.
Scooby-Dee. Scooby-Dee was the female.
Okay.
Flim Flam. That's the character with the awful, 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 awful voice. He's just this stupid little kid, and he's got this voice that's like nails on a chalkboard times a million. People being tortured, I don't know. Awful. Yeah, Flim Flam's one of the worst characters in the history of fiction.
Oh, Flim Flam. Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember that kid. I want to hear his voice, though. "13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo" is when he was introduced.
Yeah. Which I remember, I know I saw vaguely. Alright, I need to find out how many versions of Scooby-Doo there's actually been. So you got Scooby-Doo, where are you? The Scooby-Doo show, Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, the new Scooby and Scrappy-Doo show, 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, a pup named Scooby-Doo.
I used to love that show.
And in like the more modern era of the 2000s, there was What's New Scooby-Doo, which is the one I remember. One called Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, and one called Be Cool Scooby-Doo. That's all within the last few years.
Be Cool Scooby-Doo is when they smoke all the weed, right? And they're like,
possibly. Cool. As far as I know, it is the latest iteration. Yeah, it came out in 2014, so it is the newest version. No, it came out in 2015, for God's sake. But the only one I watched modern was I watched a bit of What's New Scooby-Doo, which came out in the early 2000s. It actually had Casey Kasem again. Good old Casey Kasem. Where would we be without you, voicing Shaggy and at least half the Autobots and Teletron 1. And of course, the great Frank Welker at Scooby-Doo. If you watch, it's funny, like, you know, since I'm into animation, I'm well aware of so many of the voice actors and stuff. So if you were like to look up like if you were like to look up actors who are in like the highest grossing movies who have like made the most money, like Frank Welker's like right up there.
Really?
Because if you ever needed like some, whether it's animated or live action, if you ever needed like some sort of like animal or something or some monster like grunt and moan, he was there to do it. So like, yeah, if you add up the movies Frank Welker's appeared in. What's funny is if you go just by like appearances as an actor in movies and you just go by adding them all up, who's in the movies that made the most money, it's Stan Lee. Because Stan Lee is in every Marvel movie.
Yeah.
So he's the highest grossing actor of all time.
Yep. He's been in all of them, so. When did they start that? Was it just when they started doing, what was the first one, Iron Man?
No, they did it even before the Marvel Studios ones.
Okay.
He's not in the Blade movies. And I don't think he's in the Daredevil movie. But he's in all three of I can't remember if he's in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, but he's in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man trilogy. I think his first one is probably Spider-Man 2002, I think. Because he's not in Blade, and he's not in X-Men. Yeah, he's not in any X-Men movies, he's not in the Blade trilogy, but he's in the original Spider-Man trilogy. And a couple of the movies that came out around that time before they made the switch over. Like, he's in Hulk, like the 2003 Ang Lee Hulk. He's in that. It's actually kind of funny because there's a scene where, like, he and Lou... by then, they're already doing pretty good ones. It's he and Lou Ferrigno walking out of a building, and they're dressed as security guards, and he's telling Lou Ferrigno that they need to, like, beef up security. Just, you know, kind of clever.
Here he is in the trial of the Incredible Hulk in 1989.
Which introduced Daredevil, although he was like wearing all black. I still have to see that sometime. Like Matt Murdock. Matt Murdock is his lawyer in that.
Oh, okay. Is he blind?
Yeah, he is Daredevil, but of course he dresses all in
black.
But he doesn't dress like Daredevil. He wears like all black or something. I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
Mallrats. And he was in the first X-Men.
Yeah. I love Stan Lee because he was exactly the way I pictured him to be. Like, I don't know. The first time I saw him was either Mallrats or during the Marvel Action Hour, sometime in the mid-'90s.
Yeah.
They used to do, the Iron Man and Fantastic Four show called the Marvel Action Hour, and he used to, like, show up in between it and be like, hey, true believers! And I'd be like, wow, like, you actually live up to everything I imagined you to be. He's just one of those people where, like, I don't know, so many times when you, like, hear of an artist or see them or something, I don't know, they're not what you expect kind of type thing. I had that with, like, I think Freddie Mercury when I was a kid. I heard Freddie Mercury. I had no concept of the time of history of glam or anything or being gay and stuff like that. So when I finally saw Freddie Mercury, I couldn't make the connection of this, like, you know, sort of flamboyant looking guy with this big, thick mustache. I couldn't connect that to when I heard "We Will Rock You."
Yeah.
It just blew my mind the first time I ever saw a picture of him. So that's one of the better examples. But with Stan Lee, he was like everything I ever pictured and more. He was just perfect. I was like, of course you're Mr. Marvel. Look at you. Listen to your voice. Like, it all fits so well.
But he's been old the entire time.
Oh, yeah.
Like, extremely old.
I know. I mean, he was an old guy, like, kind of in the 70s. Like, I remember seeing, like, a clip of him from, like, 1977, where he would have been, like, what? Like, around 60 or something. And you're just like, wow, he looks so young. Like, he's not a young man there at all, but he just seems so young. I mean, I know.
I'm looking at him in Mallrats. He looks terrible.
And that's like 95.
Yep.
Yeah, I live in fear of the day he dies. Can't be too far off.
What is he, 90-something?
He's got to be like 93, 94.
Wow.
He's amazing.
Yeah, all the Spider-Man. He was in Fantastic Four movie, which was pretty awesome.
Yeah, he's in the Fantastic Four movie. I remember that too. He's the male guy in Fantastic Four. It's funny. I mean, I hate that movie and forget most of it, but I remember him. He's the male guy. He's also a male guy in Iron Man 2, or possibly 3. I don't know. He's a male guy in... maybe that's even Avengers. I can't remember anymore. But it's a part where he's supposed to be delivering something, and he says, "This is for Tony Stank and War Machine Rhodes." Rhodes says, "Yep, that's him, Tony Stank." I think that might be in Avengers.
It looks like in Iron Man 2 he's playing Larry King.
I can't remember who he is in Iron Man 2. In Iron Man 1, it's a joke on Hugh Hefner. He's like dressed like Hugh Hefner, and he goes, "Hey, Hef," he bats him. I can't remember him in Iron Man 2.
He's got the suspenders and the glasses and everything.
Yeah, they're probably doing a Larry King thing. I just don't remember.
Yeah, Avengers. So, I remember all the newer stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, we're really meandering here, and people are wondering what we're doing, so maybe we should circle back and finish off.
Sure.
It's what was it? It was the merchandising. We're talking about merchandising, which led into 80s cartoons and everything that followed. See, there's always a good connection there. But yeah, I just, I don't know, because I've always been fascinated with Disney and their history, and I always think the 70s is kind of interesting, mostly because it's kind of like a part of Disney that most people don't think of because it's kind of a low point. And 79 with the black hole, I think it almost shows maybe some of their desperation. You could say innovation, but I mean, it was really a big risk putting a huge budget into this movie and using new effects and stuff and going in such a dark direction. And it didn't really pay off. It's remembered as a flop. It wasn't as bad a flop as people say it was, but it was still a flop. Certainly, when you're Disney, the hit makers, a big flop and disappointment. But I don't know, just because of the reasons I outlined at the beginning of my personal memories of it and stuff, I still have a soft spot for the movie, even though I'm so aware of its flaws and where, they tried to make it like Star Wars, which was a terrible idea because it's not a Star Wars movie at all. And, it doesn't have a good design or aesthetic to it for the most part. It has a few things that I think are okay. Like, I like the ship from the outside. I think it looks good. I like Maximilian. But as you said, like, they're like costumes. Their space flight suits are generic and boring and not memorable. The ship itself has some rooms that are good, but actually, like I said, I kind of like the blandness of the ship. I don't know why. I can't really explain or justify it, but again, I think, yeah, that probably hurt it to keep it from being memorable or something that sticks out. But I don't know. Just a movie that has some good ideas that aren't well executed, has a nice premise that isn't well executed, and just is just can't really find its footing. Is trying too many different things, some contradictory things. Its tone suffers in places and stuff like that. And its characters are boring and flat. And, when they try to make them memorable, like, I guess Vincent's memorable, but he's more memorable for being cocky and annoying. Like, either he's saying about what a great model he is, or he's just spouting his quotes. It's not like everybody's going to be, like, quoting Vincent, because he's just regurgitating other people's quotes. There's nothing that memorable in himself, except him saying, like, "Way models are the best," which is what he keeps telling Bob, right up till Bob dies. It's like, you have to die knowing we're the best. I don't know. Still is the most emotional death. Bob's death is much more emotional than the abrupt, brutal slaying of the Doctor that you don't expect, and then Ernest Borgnine getting himself blown up. Or perhaps, I guess what's memorable is our villain Reinhardt going to like perhaps hell and being fused with Maximilian. I think that's really cool, but it's I don't know what it's supposed to do for you emotionally. But yeah, so this is a movie that seems to be trying a lot of stuff at once, failing at most of it, and combining things that shouldn't be combined. But for all that, it still has a certain charm, I guess. I don't know, that's tied up with my memories. It has a very good score. I don't like the upbeat stuff when they're shooting, but when everything is going to shit and they're just being foreboding, I think the music's very powerful and good. It certainly was a good movie effects-wise. They put the budget right into the effects, and for the most part it shows. Of course, some of it's a little dated now, but when you stack it up to things like Star Wars and stuff, and the fact that they couldn't use industrial light and magic and had to sort of go their own way and use their own techniques works out for the most part. As we said, there are some parts that look kind of bad by today's standards for sure, but oh well, I can handle that and I can accept that.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a world where there's lots of bad Star Wars ripoffs,
yeah, this isn't nearly as bad as some of them, for sure,
right,
and exactly. Not nearly as blatant, right? Like it, you can see like it was going in its own direction, trying to be its own thing, and then it was like, oh, we have to put Star Wars elements into it, and that's really what fucks up the film in a lot of ways. As you said, if they just gone full forward, if they hadn't backed away from some of the more serious stuff, gone full dark, you know, and really explored these things and gotten into them instead of just touching on them lightly, throwing in stuff that is just memorable Star Wars that doesn't fit. Yeah, it's too bad. As we said, I like the idea of them doing a remake because it's the scenario where a remake should be done. It's not just taking a movie that people already like and then like trying something different just because you can cash in on the name. The name means nothing to most people. The black hole, what the hell's that? You know, but they could really, you know, take the concept and do it right this time. So I like the idea. Right now, as of 2016, it seems to be in limbo, but I like the idea of them doing it. Maybe again, just like way back then in '79, maybe in 2017 or 2018 or whatever, Disney is not the right people to be doing it. Give it to someone else. I don't know, but I like the idea of a remake. It would be kind of cool. At least to try.
Yeah. I mean, of course, it would be in direct competition with their other property now. So,
yeah. That's where things get really interesting, too, because now, of course, Disney owns Star Wars, something I'll never be comfortable with, and I don't think you'll ever be comfortable with. I liked Disney when they were known for their original characters like Mickey, Donald, and Goofy, and how they breathed new modern life into classic fairy tale characters. That's what I liked. But now it's just like, yeah, you go to Disney World, you can watch Boba Fett and the Star Stormtroopers dance. You can see the Muppets, even though Jim Henson had nothing to do with Disney. You know, here's that great character, Kermit the Frog. What a classic Disney character. He's a classic character. It's not a classic Disney character. I mean, I understand there are other people that are, don't have that mindset. They don't care who owns what. But to me, I don't know. It's just the way I grew up. This company did this. This company did that. This person did, there was a reason. I don't like it all just being under some dumb umbrella because Disney has enough money to buy everything. That's just never going to sit right with me.
I mean, it could be worse, I guess. I mean, basically, my opinion would be either they never made another Star Wars movie or let someone like Disney do it, because Lucas was not doing a very good job with it, in my opinion, anymore.
Oh, I definitely think these movies are better than the prequel films, for sure. One thing that, maybe we'll get into in a future episode is that in the near future, Jay is hoping to see the new Star Wars film, Last Jedi. I saw it a few days ago, and I won't give any spoilers. I'll just say I'm really high on it. I thought it was really good. It had a few things that bothered me a little, but for the most part, I thought it was very daring and ballsy, and for the most part, I think they really pulled it off. I was really happy with it. I was going
to wait a little bit longer to see it, but it seems like there's lots of interesting. People seem to be very split on it, like it and hate it. So I wanted to go and check it out, and it's really weird. It seems to only be showing like later showings in 3D. So there's only
I saw mine in 3D.
Oh, did you? How was that?
Well, it was fine. It's interesting though, because it's one of those few movies where like they knew they didn't need the 3D, so like it's not like it really takes advantage of anything. It's not going to be like, wow, I'm really glad I saw it in 3D. Like I don't think so.
I don't like it. I would rather just watch it in 2D. So
yeah.
But all of the later showings, like the 7 o'clock and like the 10 o'clock, are in 3D. So
That's more or less what I was dealing with. There were 3 different ways for me to watch it. In that there was like normal 2D or whatever, which was too early. There was 3D, which was at least a little more convenient. And then at really weird times, there was I don't remember how you would watch it, but the ones where you do preferred seating, which I avoided at all costs. I hate preferred seating. Thanks a lot, Cineplex, for that bullshit. But yeah, so they were actually selling out entire theaters. They were fully preferred seating, which I can't understand. I don't understand that mindset. It was bad enough when they made you do it for IMAX. I don't know what's for you. For now, if you do IMAX, you have to buy your seat. You can't just buy an IMAX ticket and go in and sit wherever. When you buy your IMAX ticket, you're buying your seat, which is really stupid.
Yeah, I don't understand. I don't know. I don't get that. But I mean, I guess it is actually going to be crowded, so it does make a little more sense there.
I can't even remember the last movie I saw in IMAX. I've only seen a handful of movies in IMAX.
I've never seen
movies. And it's been really different experiences for them because some, like, I mean, I saw, I think, Man of Steel in IMAX, and I couldn't tell you what was really different about it. And then I saw the original Wizard of Oz in IMAX, and that's obviously really different because they had to do a lot to take a 1939 movie and make it seem that way. So, you can't compare it at all to a modern movie made for IMAX. And I know I've seen a couple other things. I think I might have even seen John Carter, speaking of Disney flops. I think I saw John Carter in IMAX. That was a Disney flop I liked. They could have just given it a better title.
Yeah, the title's what killed it.
Yeah, people were like, John Carter, what the hell's that?
Was it And His Adventures on Mars, or
I mean,
something with Mars in it, wasn't it?
No, they didn't even put, that's the thing, they didn't even put that in the title.
But what was the original title, though?
The original book, there's a lot of books, but the original book that it was following was A Princess of Mars. Which would have been a better title.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, it is fair that, yeah, even the original title is a bit misleading. It is A Princess of Mars, but it is mostly about John Carter. I see their dilemma, but they could have still done something better than John Carter, which is, the same thing as like, oh, okay, I like John Carter. Keanu Reeves is great in that. No, that's not John Carter. When you just make it somebody's name, like, unless it's like a really, really, really well-known name. But
Jack Reacher, John Wick.
Yeah. Let's do a Jack Reacher versus John Wick movie.
Hey, that's not a bad idea.
It would at least make me want to see Jack Reacher. I saw the first one. It was boring as hell. I have no interest.
I like the first one.
I have no interest in seeing the second one. I think we said this before. Both of them just seem to really want to, like, help Tom Cruise reassert his tough guy image. Like, because every time I see a preview for either of them, I can remember, it's always a scene of him, like, just talking like he's really intimidating and stuff. Like, one point, like, all these guys are pointing guns at him. He's like, sure you guys want to do this? And then the whole opening thing they showed for the new one was that whole sequence where he's like, when that phone rings, this is going to happen, and he's telling the bad guys what's going to happen. Or I don't know. It's just like, Tom Cruise talking tough. I'm Tom Cruise. I'm a lethal weapon. I'm 50 pounds soaking wet.
I'm standing on an egg crate right now. I liked Ghost Protocol. I thought was really good with him in it, and then I liked Edge of Tomorrow.
I still haven't seen Edge of Tomorrow, which is weird because I've meant to see it like 100 times. I've always had like an opportunity or chance, and then I was like, I'll see it later.
That's one of the first movies that I realized how much I like Emily Blunt. She's done a lot of stuff that I really enjoy.
She's really remade herself, hasn't she? She was always in like these period pieces and romantic things, and suddenly she's been like in several action movies like that. Yeah, she's pretty cool.
But even like the girl on the train, wasn't she in that one? I thought she did a really good job on that. And
I didn't like the girl on the train, but
you didn't like. Okay.
I just thought it was way too. It was all melodrama.
Sure, and I mean, I knew what I was getting myself into.
Yeah, I mean, they made it has "girl" in the title and stuff, and at least people are thinking, "Girl with a dragon tattoo, Gone Girl." It's like, no, it's not. No,
no, she's just on a train, like literally.
Yeah, she's on a train. Happens. Yeah, I saw that. I saw that about a month ago.
She was in that Sicario also, which was pretty good.
But I've heard that's good. That's to look forward to. All right, so maybe you have a chance of seeing Star Wars soon. So
yep.
For that. So yeah, I don't know. I assume probably most of the people watching haven't seen The Black Hole. I don't know. I don't think we've ever done a film where we couldn't recommend seeing it, at least because it's interesting on some level. I think, like as Jay said, it has some boring stretches and stuff, but I don't know. I just find all the history and stuff surrounding it is kind of interesting. So not everyone's going to agree, but what we try to do on the show is at least point people into directions they might not necessarily go. Not because we always think this film is awesome, but at least there's something about it that maybe makes it worth checking out for one reason or another. Sometimes, as we said, it's more interesting talking about like why a film failed, than why it's good. And this might be one of those examples. So I don't know if you have a chance, or if you're bored or interested in Disney's era, then some of those Star Wars ripoffs or sci-fi in that era. It was a very strange transition time for sci-fi. It was finally becoming what it was supposed to become right around that year. 79 was also the year the first Alien came out, which is still one of brilliant and perfectly well done sci-fi movies out there. So really interesting sort of transitional era, I guess you could say, for that sort of movie. And you see some of the growing pains in between. This movie kind of represents that. It's kind of like trying to bridge the old, well, not the 50s, 60s stuff, but really the 70s stuff, as we said, the bleak kind of stuff, silent running type stuff, and trying to marry that with the adventure fantasy of Star Wars. And it completely falls on its face trying to do that. It should just, be one or the other. But I don't know. Still a pretty cool movie from some aspects. I can't say it's a good movie, but I do like it. I don't know. Just kind of fascinating. So hopefully, or at the very least, if you guys feel like you got enough out of us talking about it, well, that's still good. That's the point of the show. Hopefully you found the show interesting and entertaining. We're hoping that for Boxing Day to maybe do something a little different. We're not going to give anything away, though, I don't think. But it'll be different from any show we've done before if it's what happens. Unless we find out that we can't do it for some reason, and then we just have to do something quick and easy, and we have to pull something out of our asses. Yeah, but in any case, expect a show on Boxing Day, and hopefully it will be a special different show. And if it doesn't happen then, we still have that in the works. So looking forward to that for sure. So thanks a lot for being with us tonight. And if you're into Christmas, hope you have a good one.
Absolutely.
If you completely ignore Christmas, I hope that day is a good day too, because why not?
I don't acknowledge Christmas whatsoever.
I'm giving the vaguest of holiday greetings out there. I hope the next few days are pretty good for you people watching. I hope they're pretty good. But yeah, so we'll be seeing you fairly shortly, hopefully with something special. So thanks a lot, because yeah, we're getting to the end of 2017, and the show will continue into 2018. We started, as we pointed out, we started late in 2016. So we're going to 2018, so we're a span 3 years, but really the show is only just over a year old now, because we started in early December last year. So now we're on year 2. So thanks a lot for being with us, especially if you've been with us from the beginning. But then if this is your very first episode, thanks a lot. Doesn't matter where you came in, as long as you're with us. So we appreciate that, guys. Thanks a lot.
Shalom.
Shalom. Merry holiday. Happy stuff. All right. Peace out, guys. Thanks. See you again.
Thanks.